World leaders came together in Seoul on November 2010 for the annual G20 summit to discuss the state of the global economy and promote economic recovery. Women are half the world's population, but only occupy 10% of leadership in the countries that control 85% of the world's economy. Strides have been made to bring gender equality to elected leadership, but it takes much effort to get decision makers to take women's views more seriously.
Today, we will focus on G20 agenda from women's perspective.
For now, it is the burden of women who are in privileged positions to put pressure on international leaders to advance women's issues forward.
I'm sad that I must ask the First Ladies, and hopefully a woman president or prime minister at this meeting of the G20, to remind their life partners in positions of power at the helms of the leading economies of the world that women are people too, and that many of us are treated as invisible, disposable, irrelevant in the workplace in these difficult economic times.
That is, until women are equally represented at the table of global power. Thank you so much.
We've had, if you like, a very male-dominated society for a long time and a peripheralization of the feminine for a long time. But for me, that is as damaging to the male as it is to the female. We have to come together. It's like us trying to walk with only one leg. It ain't going to happen. I feel it's absolutely crucial that men and women come together.
All too often, leaders forget that financial crises have a worse impact on the lives of people already in poverty, particularly women. They are more likely than men to hold precarious jobs, to lack social protection, and to have limited access to economic and financial resources.
The truth of the matter is that women have been disproportionately affected by all these things.
Globally, the gap in participation rates in the labor market between women and men has narrowed. Still, women are rarely employed in jobs with status, power, and authority. The gender pay gap is narrowed slowly in some countries, but it has remained unchanged in others.
Based on where you sit in the world today as we are here, people are experiencing and having very different life experiences. So some people are suffering, some people are looking for equal pay, and some people are just looking for survival.
Statistics confirm women's overall progress in school enrollment, but still 2/3 of the world's adult illiterates are women.
Because to make women and girls part of the economic conversation, because in that 70% of the world's impoverished is the fact also that most of them are illiterate. And to shift that balance, literacy has to become front and center of this economic reformation.
There's some progress in health, but
Every minute, a woman is dying while delivering a life.
the proportions of women in decision-making positions in government and other institutions remains tiny worldwide.
Quite honestly, in the years about 50 years that I've been in the interfaith movement, I have noticed that it is one of the most difficult fields for women to be in, that it really is a very male-dominated profession, and I think that's something that we're going to have to work very hard to change.
In very different degrees, violence against women remains a universal phenomenon.
If we're going to improve the lives of women, and let's say children, specifically girl children today, the most important thing is that we have to look at self-esteem as equal to academic achievement.
Poor infrastructure and housing conditions, as well as natural hazards, disproportionately affect poor women. For instance, the burden of collecting water in areas not serviced by accessible water supplies generally falls on women and girls.
In many of the faith traditions, you have stories and fables of women as the water carriers. You have the story of Moses' sister. She carries the water into the promised land. We have the story in the Islamic tradition of Haga, and it is now the Hajj season for Muslim, and the well of Zamzam comes out of a woman being basically displaced.
In a lead up to the G20 summit, a group of women leaders, change makers, and activists from various countries and walks of life met at the Undyeok Cultural Center in Seoul to share experiences, strategies, and information in order to include women's perspective on economic reform.
And I think it's being honest to ourselves as women and not trying to be something we're not, and actually have the courage and the strength to bring our own characteristics, our own way of being to situations.
These are not necessarily new ideas, but to look to women for a change, look for the kinds of ingenuity that maybe is happening in a small scale that we know can be replicated in other local settings.
And so when we think of economics, we often don't think of nature. And I think placing women at the center of the economic conversation would reconnect that conversation to nature and to the environment.
That is the power of women, bringing all elements of human being, human existence.
A group of experts among the conference participants drafted a final declaration titled Gender Dividend, the Profitability of Investing in Women.
By investing in women, financially allocating resources, and investing in women in every other way is the way to elevate humanity, because investing in women bears and shows that women invest in their families. Their communities do better, our societies do better, and we prosper and have safer communities and families and countries.
Among its highlights, the declaration calls for financial support for UN women, the use of gender-sensitive budgeting at the national level, funding to enable women to participate in all spheres of influence and decision-making, the funding of programs and services to eliminate violence against women in all forms, a change in the quantification of GDP, GNP, to reflect the productivity of women who do unremunerated work worldwide.
The current economic measure, and almost the only economic measure, is GNP. And that is woefully inadequate for our world. So we do have to include many of the externalities that exist. And those externalities in many instances apply to nature. If we're to include those, then we would include the effects of pollution, we would include the effects of diminishing resources, we'd include the effects of unsustainability, we would include the effects of climate change arising from all of that. And we would also include the social injustice aspects of so much of the world's economic activity.
Our ongoing purpose is to advertise and support this declaration while expanding its constituency in order to make it a new manifesto for women's empowerment in the 21st century.
And I do think it's keep going, keep showing up, keep doing it.
I think we do need to continue to lift up the work of amazing women. So just to name someone like Wangari Maathai, who started out planting trees and then taught women to plant trees and then has basically changed the environmental situation in an entire nation and become a speaker around the world to remind us that change is possible starting in small ways, starting without a lot of financial backing, starting without a lot of institutional backing.
If we could have people who have more moral practices, causes that are going to bring more morality, issues that create different mindsets about what's justice and fairness and all that. So if we could move that from here, where we are now, to here, I think that act or that experience would be as close as we're going to come to moral politics.
Our visions and our hopes and dreams for the future will be infusing the atmosphere with just a different flavor than the norm, the everyday, the business world, the world of governments. And that makes a difference. I believe that that makes a real difference.